Good afternoon, class. Today we're going to go ahead and learn about Earth and space. The lesson title today is called Let's Orbit. Learning objective, students will be able to identify the planets in the Earth solar system, differences between them, and of course the characteristics of each of these planets. First part of the lesson, I'm going to have the children, of course, from their seats. I'm going to draw on the board a big sun, and I'm also going to draw somewhat of a solar system. At this point, I'm going to ask the students, what do you think this is? I would, of course, wait until there's any volunteers, and I would ask those volunteers to come up and draw something that they think is related to what I drew on the board. At this moment, I'll allow students to respond or time to respond to the drawing that's on the board, and of course, give them, of course, 2 to 3 minutes. Of course, we do have some questions that can be asked. What makes up the solar system? What does it mean to orbit? Can anybody tell me what an asteroid is? And how many planets do we actually have? At this point, students will then watch and listen to a video song about the solar system and the different planets. And while listening to this song, students will be required to write down any newfound information. After the video, I will have students take out their own personal journal, if not a notebook, and on a plain piece of paper, I would want them to write down 3 terms. There's more terms throughout the lesson itself. I can actually add maybe 5 terms based off of the solar system. So the first term would be solar system, orbit, planet, asteroid, and meteoroid. What I want them to do is I want them to write down everything of their understanding on these terms. And then, of course, from here, we're going to get with a partner. And with that partner, I want this member to share some things that they've learned and vice versa, what that other student knows in regards to these terms. They will share some similarities and some differences, and as they go through these terms, both of them will develop a different understanding of what these terms actually mean. So they're more than welcome to write down some of those new ideas as well. Questions that can be asked, what do you think the temperature on the planet near the sun is and why? And as the planets get further away from the sun, what do you think happens to the temperature to those planets? Explain. Other questions I can ask could be, why do some planets have rings and others don't? These will take us into our explain. The experiment, I want the kids, of course, to interact. So I would actually break my class up into groups of 9. I know this group is kind of big. I do believe if there's not enough students, it should probably only be tried with the 9 students that you have. And each student in that group is going to represent a planet, and one's going to represent the sun. I'll take volunteers on the one that wants to be the sun, taking the student that raised their hand first. And at this point, I'll distribute cards to each of the groups, and on those index cards, they'll have the planets' names, and one will state that they're the sun. At this point, the students will then form a line to get in order of which the planets are. And once these planets are arranged in their correct order, I will give my permission, once they've raised their hands, to orbit the sun. I know if we're in groups, if there's groups that don't get the correct order, we're going to go based off of time, so I'm only going to give them so much time to be able to do this before we move into our next experiment. I'll walk over, confirm again the order, I'll have them orbit, and then once they've orbited around the sun, I will direct them to go back to their tables. As a group, they'll be instructed to discuss some things they understand that different planets have, their sizes, and the arrangement. Each student will be required to take notes, so again, in their personal journal or their notebook, they may draw pictures, they can label the pictures, kind of show their understanding of what we've learned so far. We'll then come together, and at the end of the read aloud, or at the end, we'll read out loud some of those things that they didn't know, and some of those things that they were glad they found out. Now, I do want my children to kind of get into this thinking process, kind of something that we do when we relate to math, some critical thinking. If you were a planet, what planet would you be and why? Now, of course, we have so many planets. If we could get rid of a planet, which planet would we get rid of and why? This will take us into our elaborate section in which students will read and gather research information online. So they will be using their Chromebooks, and they'll be required to look up information about their favorite planet. They'll be required to create a small poster in which I will give them the poster paper, and I'll have them draw pictures with interesting facts about this specific planet. All students' posters will be displayed so that we can review them, read them together. The activity will focus on the different planets, what they look like, where they belong in the solar system, and some of their characteristics. This activity also helps the students be creative, artistic, while also learning this learning concept. I do believe that the lesson itself is important as we live on the planet Earth. So as they learn about these planets, it gives them the ability to learn about our planet as well. And some of the things that are important are the geologic past on the Earth, or the planet Earth in general. Some other things would be like climate changes. Obviously, none of these planets have the same climate. Whether or not people live on them, can live on them, and things of that sort. The lesson will build a bigger understanding of each planet and provide students with greater understanding for why planets have the size and shapes and colors that they do have. And I do believe it's relevant to some of the knowledge that they have, and it'll incorporate some prior knowledge as well. The way that I would evaluate the students for the formative assessment, I will, of course, look at some of the prior knowledge the student had based off of their terms and definitions. Of course, the development of how they formed their line whenever they orbited in class. So I will pay attention to who's basically being involved in the activity, whose knowledge is being applied as a group, and how they collaboratively were able to come together to form the solar system in the correct order. A summative assessment that I'll have will be a checklist that I'll have based on their drawing that they are to do on their own in regards to their planet. And the checklist will involve some of the interesting facts that they found, how relevant they are, how important they are, and whether or not they even go to that planet that they researched. This will give me the ability to assess their level of understanding and their knowledge on the solar system. And this, of course, will conclude our activity. I'll thank my students for volunteering, for assisting, and for coming together as a class. And I can't wait to see you on our next lesson.